The danger of someone like a Candace Owens, who has such a large following, who is not careful with her words, who has not disavowed things like her friend Kanye West, what it does is that it normalizes more and more that type of Jew hatred, especially coming now again from the right and coming from self-proclaimed Christians.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Tobin, editor-in-chief of the Jewish News Syndicate, JNS.org, and you're listening to Top Story, a weekly podcast where I analyze the most important stories happening in Jewish news around the world. Each week, I will break down politics, foreign policy, and culture to provide insights into what is going on behind the headlines. Hello, and welcome to Top Story. Thanks for joining us. We're continuing our JNS coverage of the war on Israel that was launched by Hamas on October 7th and the surge in anti-Semitism in the United States with a conversation about the shifting relations between blacks and Jews in the United States with Pastor Dumisani Washington. But first, I want to remind you to like this video and podcast, subscribe to JNS, and click on the bell for notifications. I also want to remind you that you don't have to wait a full week for more Top Story analysis. There is a daily Top Story podcast where I share more news and analysis with you about the most significant issues we're facing today. You can find the daily show under Top Story with Jonathan Tobin on the JNS channel on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can find the latest news, including Top Story and other JNS TV content, by going to jns.org or Telegram and subscribing. And now to today's program. Whatever happened to the alliance between blacks and Jews to advance civil rights in the United States? We've come a long way and in the wrong direction from Martin Luther King Jr. and Bayard Rustin to Louis Farrakhan and Candace Owens, Jamal Bowman, and the other black members of the left-wing Congressional Squad, as well as the 1,000 black pastors that the New York Times featured as pressuring President Joe Biden to crack down on Israel and stop the war against Hamas terrorists. The notion that blacks and Jews were politically united was always more aspirational than descriptive. But there is no question that there has been a shocking decline in relations between the two communities, fueled primarily by a surge in anti-Semitism. Owens, the controversial right-wing talk show host, may be more of a high-tech grifter in search of clicks than an ideological hate-monger in the mode of the Nation of Islam's Farrakhan, or left-wingers who believe in the intersectional lies about Israel and the Jews being white oppressors. But her willingness to traffic in anti-Semitic stereotypes and to spread lies about Israel makes her dangerous given her large audience. The virus of anti-Semitism is such that it has always acted like a parasite that is able to adapt and become integral to different host ideologies like fascism, Nazism, and communism, and in our own time, Islamism and the woke leftist critical race theory beliefs. The Jews are always a ready scapegoat upon whom the troubles of many communities can be blamed. And when Owens bemoans the fact that she is criticized for attacking Jews, like Farrakhan on the Squad, she is just as ready to blame Jews and peddle conspiracy theories about Jewish power and money as they are. There are always people who are going to be vulnerable to these lies, whether they are coming from the left or the right. But it is particularly tragic when this applies to African Americans. That's not just because of the legacy of Jews and blacks working together for civil rights in this country, but also because the attempt to focus anger and resentment against Israel and the Jews acts as a distraction from real problems. That applies just as readily to the way the left tries to use race to divide Americans or impel them to hate Israel, as it does to their willingness to ignore the way jihadists in Africa are victimizing blacks, a subject that those seeking to legitimize Palestinian terrorism and ignore the slaughter of Jews don't seem to care about. Yet what many blacks and Jews both seem to misunderstand is that the ideologues and hucksters seeking to divide them or to exploit these tensions are harming both communities. That's true with respect to a Black Lives Matter movement that is more interested in destroying the basis for American freedom and being part of a war on Western civilization that makes liberty possible with a new toxic form of racism than in helping blacks realize the American dream. And it's equally true with respect to Islamists like Farrakhan, as well as celebrities spreading Jewish conspiracy theories and their defenders like Owens. But it would be wrong to assume that the anger between blacks and Jews that these hate mongers are trying to promote, and which some on the Jewish left are willing to buy into, is natural or inevitable. Though the loudest voices are often the ones that get the most attention, there are people today working for black-Jewish unity just as there were in the days of Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement. We're fortunate to have with us today one such voice who is not only striving for communal harmony, but to rally African Americans against the voices of hate. Dumisani Washington is the National Diversity Outreach Coordinator for the 3 million-member Christians United for Israel, or CUFI. CUFI's diversity outreach includes African, Asian, Hispanic, and Native American outreach coordinators. Dumisani is also director of the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, a social media and library resource of Israel advocacy tools for diverse audiences. His latest book is entitled Zionism and the Black Church: Why Standing with Israel Will Be a Defining Issue for Christians of Color in the 21st Century. He's a graduate of the San Francisco Conservatory of Music and senior pastor of the Congregation of Zion in Stockton, California. Pastor Dumisani Washington, welcome to Top Story. Pastor Dumisani Washington, welcome to Top Story.
Jonathan, thank you for having me.
Well, Pastor Washington, thanks so much for joining us today. I'd like to start with the current controversy, then get to some other things. But I want to ask you to give us your take on the latest controversy that seems to be aimed at dividing blacks and Jews, that of the efforts of Candace Owens to accuse her critics of being part of a Jewish conspiracy to silence her. What do you really think is behind this story, and why is it dangerous for people like Owens, who have large online followings, to be trying to drag her audience down the rabbit hole of anti-Semitism with her?
Let's do that second part first. We did an online forum last night in our organization, and we also, every third Tuesday, we have what's called the Pastors Presents, and our next one coming up in April will be specifically dealing with Candace Owens / Kanye West, this whole the anti-Semitism that we see brewing on the right, the way that it is even more now. The danger of it, Jonathan, is multifold, right? First of all, obviously, anytime Jew hatred it takes a hold of any society, history has taught us that that's not just bad for our Jewish brothers and sisters, that's going to be bad for everyone, because what starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews, right? So when there's blatant hatred, and once again, we know that also Jew hatred is the most amorphous, right? From the left, from the right, from religious, from secular. And unfortunately, we see the West in the grips of this. And yes, right here in the United States, much of it is being spurred on by the false propaganda around Israel and the whole Gaza war and those types of things, right? So the danger of someone like a Candace Owens, who has such a large following, who is not careful with her words, who has not disavowed things like her friend Kanye West embracing Hitler and the Nazis, for no less, right? What it does is that it normalizes more and more that type of Jew hatred, especially coming now again from the right and coming from self-proclaimed Christians, right? We have been seeing this for the last couple of years since the whole Kanye West thing kind of exploded, I think around fall of 2022, if I'm not mistaken. And so what we have noticed is that conservative commentators, influencers, especially the younger, they're jumping on the anti-Semitic tropes. Yes, those people, and they always get away with, and the same types of things. So that the danger of it, it's being introduced to a younger generation as if it's a new thing, right? They don't understand that this is an old thing that always has terrible repercussions. So I think that for those reasons and others, I guess if I could say one other thing, there is also this connection. For example, you did mention him, and I'm trying to be careful with my words here as well. When Tucker Carlson platformed her, in the midst,
well, I've written about that, so go right ahead. Yes,
that controversy was already brewing, obviously. Let me say this, and so I don't want to talk too long, and this is the very first question, right? But I'll say that one of the comments that we have made in our organization and in our conversations and everything is that, for example, for those conservative-leaning America firsters, and I get it, right, and conservative values and principles and all of that, right, get it, who then decry America's relationship with Israel, for example, when it comes to military defense spending. What has always been interesting to me for years now is that when they'll decry that, they often will leave alone the billions of dollars that go to the PLO, the billions of dollars that go to UNRWA, right? They'll single out the Jewish state, which is another form of anti-Semitism, right? We're complaining about all the money that America spends in its foreign spending. And again, America's trillions of dollars in debt. I totally get it, completely understand that. But then from there, they turn and pivot to Israel. And then that's pretty much the rest of the conversation. Again, these are forms of Jew hatred that often go unnoticed.
Right. It's the only form of foreign entanglement that they're interested in.
Yes, absolutely. It's as if Israel is the only foreign country, if you will, that we have any dealings with. We don't give money to Egypt. We don't give money to Nigeria. We don't give it right. We don't have any other dealings in terms of what we do. Not to mention the fact that obviously Israel is our greatest ally in the region. So yeah, we are seeing those conversations. Yes, sir.
Or the fact that most of that money is spent here in the United States.
Yes. Yes. This is again these types of things which aren't mentioned, right? But the Candace Owens things again, for example. I guess a street lingo would be almost petty, right? So one of the things we discussed, for example, was when Tiffany Haddish, who happens to be Black and Jewish, she's an entertainer and comedian and actress, a few weeks ago, she traveled to Israel. She wanted to go, and she said, quote, see for herself. She wanted to go and see what was going on. She didn't trust what was coming out of much of the media. Candace Owens assails her, right? Tiffany Haddish did an IG live, did a little video on the plane while she's getting ready to go. Lost a lot of followers because Israel, right? She's not condemning Israel, none of those types of things. And Candace Owens picks that up on her show, and she talks about how silly it is for her to go, right? These types of things, right? And people are kind of piling on Tiffany Haddish. That fact that Tiffany would be going to Israel, right? All of a sudden, Tiffany's travel plans are important to somebody like Candace, right? To the degree that now she has to meticulously critique why she's going, why she wouldn't go if she were her. And we're seeing these types of things. Again, these are forms of Jew hatred, anti-Semitism that people they don't really see because, again, why is she picking out this person who's going to Israel? And Candace said it's because it's during a war. But once again, why is it any concern of hers? Unless she's paying for Tiffany's trip, there's really no reason for her to do that. But again, these types of things and these slights, unfortunately, are things that are just becoming pretty commonplace.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And the fact that she's trying to mix Christianity in with it as well, I think is deeply troubling just in of itself.
So to that last point, Jonathan, this both as a Christian, as a pastor, and we've been discussing this with our organization as well. Christ is King is trending, as we've said, on social media for all of the wrong reasons, right? And this is the main thing that we picked up on. The Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel is not a religious organization, though I am a pastor and several of our staff are Christians, but that's not our primary focus, though we do deal with scripture and Judaism, Christianity, these types of things. One of the things that I've had to do, particularly with our pastors' events and everything, is deal with several biblical issues. Last one, for example, was Louis Farrakhan's message at the Savior's Day in February, where he takes scripture and scriptural principles, just mangles them, right, while he's attacking Israel and attacking Israel's relationship with the Black community, similar to Candace Owens, right? Christ is King. If you are a Christian, that's a proclamation that you make, right, and unabashedly. But when you use it as an epithet to throw at your former Orthodox Jewish boss on Twitter, you're not using it as some sort of a praise or worship type of thing. You're actually using it to attack, and it's clearly anti-Semitic. But again, these are the types of things that we're seeing. So now Christ is King by people like Muslims like Tate, I can't remember his last name now, Andrew Tate and other ones, they're all tweeting Christ is king. First of all, they're Muslims. They don't believe that in a religious sense. But secondly, many people are jumping on, and that term in this dystopian world that we're living in now is being used specifically to attack Jews or to attack Israel. So we're seeing it all over social media. And some were saying, well, Christ is king is trending because it's Holy Week. I said, yes and no. It's trending because of how it's been used by Candace Owens against Ben Shapiro, and now other people are taking it as well. They're choosing a side, and they're saying Christ is king as a way to jab at our Jewish brothers and sisters, which is so wrong on so many different levels. And it's very, very dangerous when it comes to religious freedoms, when it comes to the reality. One of the points that I made, Jonathan, earlier was that it is true that in America, as in much of the Western world, it has become hyper-secular, right? It has become very trendy to come against people of faith, whether they be Christians, whether they be Jews, right? This is actually happening, and it's very, very concerning, right? So there are legitimate discussions to be had about how people of faith are being marginalized, pastors, rabbis, that type of thing. So when Christ is king is trending as this game that's being played to try to attack the Jewish people, that's what makes it even more dangerous, right? Because it takes its focus away from legitimate situations like the Orthodox community in New York that's been attacked for years, right? It's been come unnoticed. People don't even discuss it and everything now, but conservative Christian pastors and their values, they're being attacked, they're being maligned, those types of things. So it's taking attention off of legitimate conversations in a free democracy, and it's making this Christ is king a kind of wink and a nod to jab at the Jewish people.
Yeah, I mean, Candace Owens is no Jack Phillips. You know, she's not fighting for religious freedom. She's fighting for clicks and to engage in feuds. And that's sad because we have a real fight in this country, as you said, for religious freedom. She's just not part of it.
Absolutely.
Owens is part of it,
and we will be talking about this some more because of we feel it is expanding, unfortunately.
Yeah. Owens is part of a troubling subset that you rightly decry as anti-Semitism on the right. But it seems to me the main threat to Black-Jewish relations seems to be coming from the left, with those cheerleading for the demonization of Israel. How much do you think this is the result of the influence, the long march of the progressives through our institutions for ideologies like critical race theory and intersectionality that, in addition to dividing Americans on race, also grant a permission slip for anti-Semitism? And how much of it is just the result of hate mongers to successfully use Jews as scapegoats for real problems faced by African Americans?
I don't think they're mutually exclusive, Jonathan. I think it's a situation where they have kind of met each other, right? Again, I hate to use this word again, that amorphous nature of Jew hatred, right? It becomes whatever is necessary for it to become, right? So yes, you have absolutely, we've talked about that quite a bit, that in as much as we see it, Jew hatred rising on the right, particularly as it relates to Israel and all these types of things, what it has been a staple of, unfortunately, is in leftist politics, right? That have captured our academic institutions, that have captured media, that have captured, unfortunately, much of entertainment industry, right? I believe it was a couple of months ago, during some of the controversy on October 7th, Saturday Night Live had some crude jokes to kind of put out in front of at the Israelis' expense, right? So this has been going on for a long time. We know none of that is new. We see these things combining. When you have a society like the United States, that part of its greatness in its people has been that meritocracy, which becomes a controversial word for some, but the reality of it is we know that the greatness of this nation and the people who have contributed in all these different areas have become these people who have risen to the top. But what we talk about oftentimes in the Black American experience is that here you have a people who experience collectively centuries of slavery, then another century of Jim Crow, yet still, once that era had ended, these Black Americans still distinguished themselves in Black Wall Streets and HBCUs and things like the Harlem Renaissance. And it, once again, is a testament, I believe, it was Peter Robinson, who interviewed, I shared it last year, 3 Black American leaders, Glenn Laurie, it was, I believe, with Ian Rowe and I think Robert Woodson. And one of the things that they talked about was what we call a century of prosperity between 1865, the ending of the Civil War, and 1965, the ending of what would have been that civil rights era that kind of culminated in the civil rights movement, right, in the civil rights legislation, the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. What you had was, in the midst of that type of hatred, discrimination, all of those things, still Black families intact, still distinguishing themselves, still climbing, still building businesses, owning land, all of these things. Nothing was perfect by any stretch. And the point that I'm making with all of that is that that was only possible in a free market economy with a constitutional republic, right? These two things together made sure that even former slaves were able to access what we used to call the American dream, right? So when things are put in place, no matter how well-intentioned they were, that would then give people access based on color of skin, based on gender, based on all these other external factors, and not so much what the people have accomplished or can accomplish. Yes, you have a very, very warped society. You have a situation in which meritocracy or merit becomes a bad thing. Somehow, if somebody actually worked for something and achieved it, they somehow did it by hook or by crook. And the first people are going to be attacked when that situation is released are the Jewish people.
Yeah, that was very well stated. We hear a lot nowadays about Black anti-Semitism and Black resentment of Jews, even for their role in the civil rights movement. But we know that white evangelicals are strongly pro-Israel. But how strong is support for Israel and for good relations with Jews among Black Christians right now? Where is that coming?
I get that question often, Jonathan, and if we had the ability one day, hopefully soon, we'll be able to do a real survey, right? Because the only surveys that we are aware of that have been done, for example, particularly post-October 7th, have been general ones in terms of American attitudes towards Israel. And to your point, what we see is that America continues to stand with Israel, but the overwhelming majority of that seems to come from the right. And when it comes to the left, when it comes to the Democratic Party, it's more, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 2 months or a month or so after the war began with Israel, the IDF going in to rout Hamas, to go in to respond, right? They did a poll, and you probably are more aware of it than me. I think like 80-something% of Republicans were the ones who sided with Israel, and maybe 60-something% or so of Democrats, somewhere around in there. I may be quoting that wrong, but it was a clear disparity, right? It was very clear where that majority...
as there has been in terms of support for Israel for the last few years, yes, for sure.
And so what you have in terms of that demographic is that, it's funny, I often tell people the two ethnic groups in the United States that vote most overwhelmingly Democratic are Jews and Blacks, right? Black 90%, Jews 70-something%, right? So the reason I'm stating that is because it would appear that some of the Israel support in the Black community may fall along those same lines politically, right? Now, to your final thing in terms of Christian pastors and leaders support, I can only further answer it anecdotally. Having traveled the country several years, both with Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, formerly with the Christians United for Israel, I have met so many Black pastors and churches who stand unabashedly with Israel. What I also have found, however, is two things. Number one, there's not really a measurement in terms of that as a demographic. No organizations that I know have gone to Black Christians and then polled it that way, right? But number two, I've also found, Jonathan, and we're going to be writing a piece on this in our Substack pretty soon, that the media marginalizes those people. A quick little anecdote, right? Since October 7th, the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel has been contacted by several mainstream media outlets. I won't name them. That's not important, right? They contacted us expressly to get response about Israel, Palestine, all of that from Black leaders because they see what's going on themselves. And so they wanted to reach out. Pastor Dumisani, can we talk? We set up meetings. Each of those interviews, none of which have been released. There was no writing, right? They would ask questions. We would respond. And at the point that they didn't like our responses, the interview became a debate. As inappropriate as that sounds, the person was no longer a journalist. What we said, they didn't like, and so they began to challenge us. And we had to remind them, your job is to write what we say, even if you don't like it. If you want to write a hit piece, right? No, they didn't write a hit. They did nothing. And we're gonna be writing a piece about it ourselves on our Substack. And one of the reasons why is not to decry it. We're not complaining. It is what it is, right? But to let people know, we have seen this. When it comes in terms of Black support for Israel, generally the media is uninterested in having that conversation. But if it's a free Palestine, if it's we are locked together in this struggle against yada yada, boom, that will get all of the press. And I say it to my Jewish friends, it's like someone interviewing Jewish Voice for Peace and then putting them on the front page and causing most people to believe that they are speaking for the majority of American Jews. You and I both know that's not true, but that same thing happens with the Black community.
Yeah, I asked that question, and I'm not jumping to assumptions about who you were talking about there, but I wrote about a major feature published by the New York Times about 1,000 Black pastors uniting to denounce Israel, to pressure President Biden to, crack down on Israel and, support Hamas's survival with a ceasefire. There were no voices on the other side in that piece. And you would think that there, in this vast universe of Black, Christian churches, there had to be some that were pro-Israel. I've met so many myself, yet none were mentioned in that piece. And, certainly what those 1,000 pastors were doing spoke to a certain sentiment and
yes.
to sort of, as I believe, the influence of progressive, these toxic ideologies, and
yes, sir.
A false idea that Palestinian terrorism should somehow resonate, with African Americans who remember the struggle for civil rights, which to me is nuts, but. Those voices, those pro-Israel voices in the African-American community were just completely erased.
Yes. That's one of the reasons why our organization exists. We have the privilege of working with and networking with those pro-Israel pastors across the country, or those who are neutral, who need more information, right? And that's what we do. Our primary focus is education, right? But Jonathan, that piece in the New York Times, we told people, was a classic example of gaslighting. Not only were they interviewing certain types of pastors, these were progressive pastors, right? And if you're a progressive pastor, fine, right? But there was no other talking to other pastors who had a different view. And there were other signs in it that it was gaslighting. For example, one of the pastors was quoted as saying that they haven't seen this type of anxiety since the civil rights movement. And I had to stop my eyes from rolling, right? I was like, okay, so who are you talking about? You mean the younger generation who didn't experience the civil rights movement, or an older generation who somehow is being cynical around that? Because I have a hard time believing that the Israel conflict with Gaza is somehow going to eclipse what they may have experienced in Selma and other areas. Come on, I mean, let's just be really honest with each other, right? But the other thing, Jonathan, that people would have to understand about that piece, it was purely written from the American domestic political point of view, right? Even in the title, it was about Biden's reelection, right? It wasn't about the people, even the people of Gaza, right? There wasn't even about the Palestinians under oppressive Hamas rule. It wasn't about the Israelis rightly trying to defend their people. The main focus was, what do we need to do to get Joe Biden reelected, right? So that right there should have any fair-thinking person a little cynical, right? Because the piece is about votes for this party, not really about the conflict or about the human situation that's going on there.
Yeah, or about the needs of the people that they're supposedly representing in this piece. Speaking of that, some of the members of the Congressional Squad, some of the African Americans on it, whether it's the existing members, or newer ones like Jamal Bowman or Cori Bush, they get a lot of attention. But do you think they're representing the true sentiments, or really more to the point, the interests of African Americans right now? I mean, how did these kinds of really radical ideas somehow become a community that, as far as in my experience, is more religious practically than many white communities, somehow is being represented by the most left-wing elements in our politics.
When I see the Cori Bushes and the Jamal Bowmans, the African American members of that squad, as you say, that those who came later on, they were after the Ilhan Omars and the Rashida Tlaibs, right? This actually grew. I am reminded of the point of Yasser Arafat's approach. The reason why the former chairman of the PLO would take every opportunity for a photo op with people like Jesse Jackson or Louis Farrakhan was to sell his movement as his genocidal movement as a movement for justice. This was intentional. It was always done over and over and over again, right? So that fast forward to now, 50 plus years later, what you have is that anti-Israel establishment, whether you want to talk about it being Hamas, or you want to talk about the PLO, any type of iterations of the Muslim Brotherhood, or whatever have you, their need to have connection with the Black community to give cover. It's like Students for Justice in Palestine on the college campuses. The first coalition they build is with the Black Student Union. Why? Because that's the majority of the Black American community's opinion? No, but because of the optics, right? So on the ground, in many cities across the country, what Black families are talking about is the same thing American families are talking about. They're talking about groceries, they're talking about gas, they're talking about education, right? They're not, so the Israel-Palestine issue is not even, it's very similar to the South Africa one. I have South African family, right? And the ANC is rabidly anti-Israel, but the vast majority of Black South Africans, that's nowhere on their radar. They're dealing with some bread and butter issues. This is the same thing here. So to your point, Jonathan, when we see Black American leaders on Capitol Hill going on and on and on about Israel-Palestine, going on and on and on, even if that's their opinion, right? But for them to make that some sort of staple of their politics, you can pretty much rest assured that they were not sent to Capitol Hill by their Black constituents for that purpose. They have their own agenda. And this has been going on again since the 1970s, at least, when Yasser Arafat would try to do that to the Black community.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And of course, it plays into this intersectional, myth that somehow, the conflict between Jews and Arabs over the land of Israel is somehow a racial conflict. But of course, nothing could be further from the truth. Jews and Arabs are more or less the same race. The majority of Jewish Israelis are, by the definitions of the American left, people of color.
Yes.
Because they trace their origins to the Middle East or North Africa, not to mention, Black Jews from Ethiopia, yet somehow they get erased in this and as part of this sort of ideological confidence game. But somehow that seems to be treated as legitimate.
What's amazing to me is kind of back to what you said before, now enter again the unique hatred of anti-Semitism, right? So it erases these realities, right? Dr. King had that very conversation with rabbis in 1968, right? We quote from the document often. It's the one which he's with the Rabbinical Assembly 10 days before he's assassinated. And one of the questions that he's asked about the Arab-Israeli conflict, because it was about a year after the 67 war, he was told, Dr. King, he said, one of the rabbis said that he was told that color is all important in this world, so that Black Americans should stand with the Arabs who were people of color, right? The same thing in the Israelis who are white Europeans. Again, this propaganda has been there. Again, that was 1968, almost literally what you just said. Dr. King went on to say that, he basically kept his same justice ethos in that we don't judge based on color and those types of things. This is about justice, right? He talked about that type of thing. One of the things the rabbi said to him, though, he said, even though Dr. King, he used the term, they're Asian Jews, he meant the Mizrahi, right? Those the older term that they would use, right? But the point was being made even then, Jonathan, what you're saying now, that anyone who knows Israel knows that when you step off the plane in Tel Aviv, when you walk around, you see Jews that like in the West, they're Black, they're white, they're brown, they're right. You'll see that. You don't see how it's being characterized by the media. But unfortunately for all of us, it's funny. I did a podcast a few days ago with some young Ethiopian Israelis. They reached out. I knew a couple of them. They were kind of newer, so we all kind of talked a little while, and we started having this conversation. They started a podcast, Jonathan, because they wanted to get their voices out. I'm telling you, they did it because they are hearing how their nation is being described outside, and they, as these Zionist Israeli Jews, they're like, no, we want to make sure that we're telling our story. But one of the things I told them, is that many people don't understand about the West, and we deal with this as an organization, is the poor state of education. Illiteracy rates are extremely high in the United States of America. And the people who are most impacted by that are the African-American community. Up to 85% of Black boys in most public schools around the country are functionally illiterate. This is how this disservice that's actually happening, right? Once again, while the Black members of the squad up there squawking about Israel-Palestine, there are real issues that are going on in our communities. And what's the point for that? If our children of different ethnicities now, but if our children are so being disserved in terms of education, then they're more open to propaganda, right? So they're going to listen. So I'm from California. I don't live there now, but I lived there all my life. In one of the places where critical ethnic studies was first made law. I mean, literally, you have to take these courses for California state universities. It's very anti-Israel, lots of anti-Semitism that's in there, right? And it's also trickled down to the lower grades as well, to the 8 through 12 and everything, right? So you have a combination, Jonathan, of largely kids who are struggling in their reading, but given a healthy dose of free Palestine. You put those two things together, and what you get is indoctrination, almost like the indoctrination of kids in the West Bank, kids in Gaza, right? Yes. Are they being told to blow somebody up? No. But what they are being told, that Jews are the oppressors, Israel is a colonizer, etc. They're learning these things for grade in school. I tell people, I'm not trying to be the harbinger of bad news. You think it's bad now? Wait till these kids graduate and then come into society, because they are being indoctrinated with this same type of propaganda, and they have to answer those questions that way, or they're not going to get grades. And oh, by the way, they don't read that well. This is where we are in our nation right now.
That's so true. No, I know you have worked to raise awareness about the issue of jihadists, Islamists, attacking Blacks in Africa. Why has this issue gotten so little attention, not just in the corporate media, but apparently, at least to my view, also in the Black community? Why aren't more people caring about this and up in arms about it?
My theory has been on this for years, Jonathan. Well, let me say this first of all. Long before I was involved with Israel advocacy and strengthening these ties, back in the 90s is when I first became aware of the plight of African Christians in places like Sudan, right? I was in my 20s then, I think, at the time. And in so doing, I began to adopt different African nations and praying for them. As a pastor, I got involved with some of the Voice of the Martyrs and some of these other Christian organizations that would track these things, right? So that was, again, before my understanding of Israel as a modern state, right? I knew it biblically coming up in a Christian home, right? And the reason I mention that is that I have been aware, from an activist, before there was the internet, I would write letters to my senators and my congressmen, right? Back when Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein, of blessed memory, they were actually the senators, right? I was writing to them and saying, we need to do something about this, right? Here's why I'm saying all of that. I noticed then, and as I got older, I would see more and more that there weren't many African-American voices there, some, right? But what I began to see, Jonathan, and this is my working theory, is that the more the Palestine narrative grabbed a hold of the Black progressive political class, the less there was concern about anything going on in Africa. Case in point, the last that I remembered, and I've been researching this for a while, that there was any type of concerted Black voices where Africa was concerned was in 1994, the genocide in Rwanda. Meanwhile, there have been the genocides in Congo, 1995 to 2005. There's a genocide of Christians in Nigeria. There's hundreds of thousands, if not more, of slaves in Libya, and on and on. And there's virtually no Black American organizations that are giving rise to it. However, because of leftist politics, they will pay lip service to Israel-Palestine, right? So this is part of what has been our theory, that there has been, unfortunately, along with the anti-Israel propaganda that has been ensconced in much of leftist politics, there has also been, by necessity, a ignoring of the jihadist slaughter of African Christians in many parts of the region. And oh, by the way, Hamas and Boko Haram, ideologically linked. Just a few weeks ago, members of Hamas were touring Nigeria, right? And they were there kind of almost like a victory lap, right? We were telling people they have been, I have an African pastor friend, Jonathan, real quick story, and I'm a pastor, I'll tell this really quick. He was saying the last time he was in Jerusalem, he was kind of hanging out, right? An Arab young man walked up to him. He said, "Where are you from?" And the gentleman said, "Nigeria." And the young Arab young man in Jerusalem said, oh, Boko Haram, we support them. We send them money. Now, if a 12, 13-year-old Arab boy in Jerusalem is aware of the connection between Islamist terrorism in Jerusalem, right, or in Israel, in this area, and Boko Haram, how likely is it that that's probably something that's pretty well known throughout society? Once again, it's one of the worst kept secrets. You have a situation in which these were Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, many of them who are funded by Iran. They're all kind of working from the same playbook, but yet you don't have those voices. Our organization is bringing this information to Black pastors and leaders, many of whom who have not heard it, if not at all, for a long time. And we're telling them one of the reasons why you haven't heard it has a lot to do with the whole false narrative when it comes to Israel-Palestine.
Yeah, I think that really gets to the heart of it. And of course, you know, the Boko Haram kidnapping of girls was, you know, the one thing that got some attention. But again, that was quickly dropped. And of course, there's been no comparable. Some of the people who championed it, we remember Michelle Obama with her embracing the hashtag "Bring Back Our Girls." She's done nothing about the Israeli hostages. Yes. But let me just slightly shift our attention. You've written about Louis Farrakhan and his influence. Membership in the Nation of Islam is not huge, but he does appear to influence the Black community out of proportion to those numbers. How influential is Louis Farrakhan and his Nation of Islam among Black Americans right now?
So what you have with Louis Farrakhan, who's been the leader of the NOI for, I guess, since the 70s, he's seen, as I share with some others, by some as this type of father figure. He's now 92 or 3, I can't remember now, has mentored, if you will, and raised up lots of young Black men who feel very beholden to him. By all rights, as I've said before in my writings and my lectures, there have been some very positive things that the Nation of Islam has done in some Black areas in terms of reducing recidivism rates and helping with job placement and those type of things. Very, very needed, right? So in that respect, he's won the hearts of many. Unfortunately, that package also comes with a great deal of Israel hatred, a great deal of anti-Semitism that's legendary. Again, like as you said, we've written about it. So the influence that we have seen doesn't seem to be as much numbers as it seems to be the most elite, some of the most powerful politicians, entertainers, some professional athletes, and to the degree that they have their own followers, right? You have that kind of regurgitated some of that anti-Semitic stuff, right? What's interesting is that, again, it doesn't seem to at all speak for anything close to the majority of the African-American community, but it has then still been accepted. For example, much of what Kanye was saying, as people were kind of shocked by his words, Louis Farrakhan has been saying those things for decades, right? And Kanye credits him as one of the people who's influenced him, right? So once again, Kanye, one of the greatest hip-hop artists of all time, has let us all know that one of his influences is Louis Farrakhan. That's the type of thing that we see, that some very, very noted people, politicians, like I said, people on Capitol Hill who are close to him, who have been in his orbit, right? That's part of what the challenge has been, and has been the further normalizing that even if it's a situation where the Black Americans would not agree with some of the anti-Israel stuff and anti-Semitic stuff that's said, they oftentimes will be quiet because, well, it's Louis Farrakhan and we don't want to seem like we're coming against that type of thing. And so we are from that ilk that we're not really concerned with what it looks like or appears like. We want to deal with what's actually happening on the ground. So yeah, numbers maybe not huge in the Nation of Islam, but the influence seems to be with very influential people who call him friend and who are influenced by him.
Yeah, and I think part of that is also this idea that, racism is only something that, goes one way, that, white racism is a real thing, but that in spite of the fact that so much of what the Nation of Islam promotes is fundamentally racist, yet people are willing to give them a pass just because, as you say, whether it's solidarity with somebody within their community or because they think, the good things he does in some communities justifies anything.
It's what's always interesting to me. That part of his shtick, if you will, is something that Booker T. Washington, the great educator back in the early 1900s, basically said. He, without me quoting it verbatim, he said, there's a class of black person who will always uphold the trials and tribulations of what he called the Negro at the time, right? So that he can always have a job. In other words, his focus is going to be to exploit anything that he sees as a struggle or difficulty. Again, this is like 1912, right? So that's how long Booker T. Washington called it then, right? So when you have that type of thing, not someone who's bringing just an issue of justice to the table, but the demonization of white people, the demonization of Jews, right? The demonization of Israel for the purpose of let's rally around this victim mentality, which has done nothing for anyone other than enrich the people who do it. This is why people like Louis Farrakhan and others, they'll preach those things and get in their car, go to their very, very exclusive neighborhoods, right? We talked about with Black Lives Matter, all the money that was raised, right? They buy these houses in neighborhoods that are like 98% white, right? So, which is fine. If that's where you want to live, no problem. But you've been demonizing white people, right? And so now what you're showing is that all that is shtick, all that is just a facade so that you can be however lauded and applauded, right? And especially milking that whole victim thing, right? But then you go and you surround yourself with the very access that you say other black people cannot attain, right? You're actually going and living the quote unquote American dream. I mean, I don't know. One of the greatest grifts is go ahead and preach a bunch of hate so you can make money, preach against capitalism, preach against the free markets, how this is evil, that's evil. Then your car is $200,000, your house is $2.3 million. You're a pretty good capitalist to me, right? So that's been going on for a very, very long time. I can say this, that, and I'm always hopeful, Jonathan, there seems to be this younger group of African Americans, right? Again, that has never been spoke for the majority, but it unfortunately has this impact. But I'm seeing over the last 10 years or so, this younger group emerge and challenge some of these things that they've been told. What's going to happen from there? Who knows, right? But I'm always hopeful. Like our children, we have 6 children ourselves. My youngest is 24. We'll be 24 this fall. And we've had these conversations, right? Our kids keep us informed with stuff that we're no longer, privy to all the time as older people. And the conversations that I have, that they have, they'll have conversations with some of their friends, right? And they'll come back, politically, race, those types of things. And I'm hearing more and more nuance, more and more challenging of the whole orthodoxy of white people bad. I'm watching this type of thing, right? Or calling out those, right, more and more, who are just what we call poverty pimps, right? Those people who want, I'll stop talking here. I tell people the reason why we often say BLM is PLO and blackface is because they function the same way. They pretend to actually represent the people that they say are marginalized and oppressed, when in reality, all they're doing is receiving money and doing nothing for those communities that actually need attention. That's, again, there's a playbook that Yasser Arafat established a while ago, and it seems to still be working pretty good, particularly for the Israel haters.
Yeah, very true. And that leads me to my next question. The poll results that seem to be driving the liberal media out of its collective minds lately are those surveys that are showing a decline in support among African Americans for Democrats, and specifically for Donald Trump among African Americans, especially black men. Why do you think so many blacks are abandoning the Democrats and left-wing politics? And does this show that the left's focus on making race the only issue that anybody should care about distract us from, class and economic issues that are actually far more important to ordinary people, whether they're black or white?
Yes, it is a resounding example of people voting their pocketbook, voting their family, voting their opportunities, right? So yes, we've seen this. I believe in 2016, if I'm not mistaken, maybe Trump got 8% of the black male vote, I think it was. They're expecting that to double, if not more, right? The barbershop conversations, Jonathan, and I'm talking about the black community, the church conversations, the off-the-grid conversations. Once again, the conversations that much of the media would not be interested in when it comes to actually polling. And the conversations that are being had, again, for people watching, it's not about Israel, right? It's not about diversity, equity, inclusion. It's none of those things. It's about buying a home, starting a business, education. Again, I tell people over and over again, one of the greatest, in my opinion, civil rights issues of our day is education. Access to quality education, which has been an abysmal situation in the black community since the 1970s, at least, right? So these are the conversations that people are having. I'll give you an example. About 2 years ago, one of our IBSI ambassadors, Connie Morgan, she wasn't an ambassador at that time, she wrote a piece for Free Black Thought, and anybody's watching, you can check it out. I can't remember the exact title, but it's about black homeschoolers. This is just as an example. As of 2022, 16% of all African-American homes were homeschooled. Oh, I'm sorry, 16.1. The largest percentage of any ethnic group in the United States. And much of that surge had happened post-2020 with the school closures and that type of thing, right? And it blew people's doors off, right? First of all, black people don't homeschool. Black people don't know. That's absolutely wrong. Black people don't access education choice. Absolutely wrong. That's always not been the case. But the surge was a combination of, again, school closures and the parents coming to the realization of both their children not learning or learning lots of propaganda, right? Who was leading that charge? Black Americans. So to answer your question, what are people doing? Black Americans who are for somehow challenging the orthodoxy that they have to vote Democrat and vote left. They are looking at stuff like their children's education, their housing, their jobs, their starting businesses, all of those things. These are the very basic things that are happening. And oh yes, so when they stand up and they say Israel, Israel, Palestine, Palestine, isn't it funny? The more the Biden administration buffets Israel, the lower he goes in the polls in Michigan, right? It's just doesn't make any sense to anybody's watching, but I can tell them as far as the black community is concerned, many of them are not concerned, not with Israel, Palestine, not to that degree, not that it's going to be a voting issue. And circle back to what you said, the 1,000 pastors in that New York Times piece, the fact that that piece was written to make people believe that somehow the black American community was going to vote or not vote for the Democrats based on Israel, Palestine was laughable, right? There's absolutely no way that foreign policy issue was going to be the thing that moved black voters, right? What was going to move them was what we're saying right now. That's another reason why it was gaslighting. And it's another reason why the leftist establishment is scratching their heads, because what I'm saying to you right now, they think it's complete gibberish, right? They have drank the Kool-Aid. They looked at the whole leftist playbook and they said, if we stand up and we say these leftist things, the black people will just come around, and they're finding that that's not really happening right now.
You know, you raised the issue of school choice, which is, something I care a great deal about. And I think many of us have always looked to the black community as a community that, they're the victims of the government school monopoly more than anybody else. And at times it seems as if, sort of the limousine liberals, to use that old phrase, who send their own kids to private elite schools, but think that, ordinary Americans should have to, suffer through whatever failed public school is in their district. The classic example was the hypocrisy of Barack Obama sending his kids to the Shipley School while, and denying school choice to add the African-American voters in the District of Columbia. How optimistic are you that is an issue that there's really an opportunity for change in this country? Is that something that more African Americans are going to start to prioritize?
It seems as though organically that seems to be the case. That seems to be some of what's moving the needle when it comes to the polling that's going on, right? That's not the only issue, but it's one of the top issues, right? So again, California as a barometer, what I told you about, it was 2017 we were first tracking this. I wrote this in my book, Zionism in the Black Church. At that point, 2017, 75% of Black boys were functionally illiterate, right? This is within the California public school system, right? It's only gotten worse from there, as it has in many parts of the country, right? It's a clear indication that the system is not working. And what you've had, my wife and I, we ran a private music school for about 20 years in Stockton, California, in that it was this low tuition based service within the community. We had multi-ethnic groups that would come and everything. And one of the things that we would often do is have conversations around education, because my wife taught in the public schools. I taught in charter schools for a while. And we would talk to the parents about this very thing. Jonathan, regardless of ethnicity, whether they're Hispanic, Black American, Asian, white, the parents had the same concerns. Their child receiving a quality education, and if they were not in the district where they were, how they could go about getting that for their child, right? This is what does not separate us by race. Any parent wants their child to have a good education so that they can have a good life. Because the poor districts, and let me say again, I always have to be careful, Jonathan, this is not me attacking teachers. Teachers are amazing, right? They do amazing work. It's the system that's broken, right? It's almost like attacking maybe a religious system, but you're not attacking the rabbis or the pastors, right? This system might be broken here, but this is good, but this is bad. The system is what's broken, right? And so what's happened is that more and more Black families, as I just quoted that statistic from a couple of years ago, 16.1% homeschooling, are taking it upon themselves. They are seeing that waiting for the cavalry to come, they are seeing that just keeping their kids, keep them in the public schools, because you'll drain the resources if you take them out, and the resources follow the child. But now the parents are saying, but you're wanting me to sacrifice my child's education? No, I'm not willing to do that. I'm going to do everything that I can, just like you, Mr. Congressman, and you, Mr. Senator, send your child over there, right? So we see, Jonathan, that this is what is already happening in the Black community. And God willing, it will continue to expand. We are involved in different initiatives as well when it comes to education, curriculum, those types of things, where we are consulting with or sharing with my son several times during the years of 2020 and 2021, was speaking at school board meetings and at UC Regent meetings in California about the education and about the curriculum that was being introduced that was not serving the people and was not actually addressing these issues here. So we've seen on the ground that it seems to be growing. Hopefully, we're going to see that issue grow even more.
Yes, well, I hope so. Pastor Washington, you've given us a lot of reason for hope. Thanks so much for joining us today and for your insights. We also want to thank our audience. Please remember to tune in every day for Top Story Daily Edition. And whether you're listening to us on Apple, Google Play, Spotify, or any of the other podcast platforms, or watching us live on Facebook or Twitter, or on the JNS YouTube channel, please like and or subscribe to Top Story, click on the bell for notifications, and give us good reviews. Please write to us at editor@jns.org and let us know where you listen or watch the show and what you think about it. And remember, keep reading and thinking for yourself, and we'll see you again next week.